Can I begin by telling you a story? Yes. I love to tell stories. I want to read you a story, actually. This one's not original. I'm going to read this story to you. Maybe you'll recognize it. A hare made fun of a tortoise for being so slow. Tired of the hare's boasting, the tortoise challenged him to a race. The hare raced ahead and, confident of winning, took a nap midway through. The tortoise kept moving, slow and steady, and crossed the finish line first. How many of you have heard that story? Yeah. It's called a fable, right? Aesop's Fables. It's a fable. And the lesson you're supposed to learn is slow and steady wins the race. How about another one? You want to try another one? A hungry fox saw some juicy grapes hanging from a vine. He leapt again and again to reach them, but failed. Giving up, he muttered, "They're probably sour anyway." Have you heard that one? Hey, all right, one person has heard that one. The moral of the story, it's easy to despise what you cannot have. Now, these are fables, right? You know what a fable is. It's a story that teaches a lesson, right? And none of us are sitting here going, I wonder who staged the race between the tortoise and the hare. I don't know if such race ever actually happened. None of us are trying to figure out, did this happen or didn't this happen? Most of us are trying to go, okay, what's the lesson to learn? Right? What's the lesson that I can take away? And I could sit here and read Aesop's Fables all day long, but you all probably have food in the oven that's burning. So we won't read any more fables, but the thing I want you to pay attention to is I think most of us, at some level, hear this story about Jesus who was dead but is now alive, and we sort of relate to it like a fable. We sort of relate to it like, yeah, that's the Christian church's fable, right? That's the story that they tell. And there's a lesson to be learned in the story that they tell. And every year when I show up on Easter, they tell the same story again. They really love that fable. But there's not a thought about whether or not it actually happened. Do you realize how ridiculous it sounds? And you do, because you're smart like me. How ridiculous it sounds when I say, there was a guy who was dead and is now alive. Like, I think people are bristle at the Christian morality ethic, right? We're like, oh, how unbelievable, how unreasonable. Have you ever thought what it's based on? How crazy it sounds that I'm standing here telling you today that Jesus, who we remembered 2 days ago as crucified, dead, buried. How ridiculous does it sound that now today I'm saying, and now he's alive? You've all probably been to a funeral, or most of you have been to a funeral. How many of you went to the funeral thinking, that one's going to pop up? That one's going to pop up. I went to a funeral last year. I had no expectation that coffin was going to open. Not one. Some of you are maybe a little bit more afraid of that, and that's why we do cremation. You're just afraid that maybe it will happen. But all joking aside, how ridiculous does it sound that Jesus, who was dead, is now alive? And yet that's what I stand in front of you confidently today saying. Many of us come to that reality, and we come at this sort of fable-like level. That there's something good in the lesson that the church teaches, that Jesus was dead and was raised again, but it's all a myth. It's a good fable. It's a good way to recognize that good things can come out of bad. That, hey, turn that frown upside down, at the end of the day, you'll be happy, and all of the other things that we say. But what I'm here to say to you today, hopefully in an abbreviated fashion, now you know I'm lying. No, I do always hope. In an abbreviated fashion is that Jesus was bodily raised to life, and that matters for all of us. that matters for all of us. So we're going to look today at this passage. But before we look at this passage, I want to offer you reasons why you might consider today that Jesus was actually bodily resurrected. There's a whole lot of reasons why people would put out that this wasn't a real thing, it didn't really happen. But can I give you 4 reasons why you might consider what I'm about to say today? There are 4 major things that virtually all scholars and all historians, even the skeptics, agree with. So your friends on Facebook probably are not those people. There are 4 things that virtually all historians and all scholars agree. There was a man named Jesus of Nazareth who lived in the 1st century, was crucified on a Roman cross, and was buried. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, virtually all historians believe that fact. It's not even up for debate among most scholars. The second piece is immediately after the crucifixion of Jesus, the followers of Jesus began proclaiming publicly that they had seen Jesus alive. You can be a skeptic or you can be a believer, but this is a fact that's not up for debate. You can actually build that case from sources outside of the Bible. The third fact that would be worth considering is this wasn't a slow legend that grew over hundreds of years. It was a movement that exploded within 1 generation. This is another fact that you can prove without reading the Bible. In fact, all of these are facts that you can prove without reading the Bible. And then the fourth one, every single one of the first eyewitnesses was willing to suffer and even die, not for an idea, but for an encounter they had with the risen Jesus. These 4 facts are why you ought to consider what I'm about to say. There are people who have not looked very deeply into all of these things who might say these are up for debate, but serious scholars, serious historians would say these are proven facts. And whether you're a skeptic or otherwise, they agree. It's hard to get people to agree on anything, right? I mean, we just went through an election. People can't agree on anything. If you read the news, nobody agrees. So there's no real historical debate. What we proclaim and what I'm telling you today is that the best evidence, or the best cause for all of that evidence is that Jesus, who was dead, is now alive. So I want to read this passage of Scripture from Matthew chapter 28. If you have a Bible, you can turn to there. If you don't have a Bible, I've tried to make it easier for you. I realize that whenever I say we have Bibles on either side, everybody's like, I'm not going to the front. If you need a Bible, there's Bibles in the windowsills. Feel free to grab one, and you can follow along. If you don't have a Bible, take it as our gift to you. You can take it home. Matthew chapter 28, beginning in verse 1. And here's what we read. After the Sabbath, at dawn, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." Verse 8, so the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." While the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. Now, there's two stories that play out here. There's two separate encounters of the risen Jesus that play out here. And in every encounter that you have with the risen Jesus forces you to make a decision. It forces you to make a decision. The first encounter that we see is the encounter by the guards. Read again, verse 2. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The guards had an encounter. They witnessed the resurrection. This angel showed up and opened the tomb not to let Jesus out, but to show everybody that there wasn't anybody inside. And these guards were witnesses. And they fell to the ground and they were terrified. And we see what happened after they witnessed the resurrection. Verse 11, while the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. We could call this encounter and this response a desire to maintain control. It is possible to witness the resurrection of Jesus, to know that it was a fact, and yet desire so desperately to maintain control that you will suppress the truth that you've come into encounter with. And it's not really that surprising, right? Don't we all kind of do that just a little bit? Think about the reality of what happened. Yes, we went to the tomb. Yes, the tomb was empty. Yes, we saw an angel. Yes, the tomb was heavily guarded. It would be unlikely that the disciples of Jesus who were not armed to go against Roman guards who were armed and somehow overtake them and steal the body. Not to mention how ridiculous it sounds to say, tell everybody that you fell asleep and the disciples stole the body while you were sleeping. How would you know it was the disciples if you were sleeping? That's stupid, right? But and work it out even further than that. If you weren't sleeping and you saw it and you had a sword and they don't, is it possible that you're going to be able to steal the body? No. It's a ridiculous story. It's a sort of a justification. I'm going to suppress the truth of what I know in order to keep my control, to keep my power. Because what's true is every one of us knows that if Jesus, who claimed to be God, who claimed to be the Jewish Messiah, if Jesus actually was dead and actually was raised, you know it makes a claim on your life. We all know it. I've never come across anyone else who was dead and is now alive. And if that person says things about my life, I have to take that seriously. The fact that Jesus was raised makes a claim on your life. And so all of us, when we get to the point in our lives where the claim that Jesus makes touches our safety, our control, our sense of ability to manage our own lives, we all do this. We all suppress it. We all make justifications. As soon as Jesus wants to have some say about how you live your life in relationship to other people, we start justifying why we're not going to do that. Love your enemies, Jesus says. Just right now, just where you're sitting, just think when you say your enemies. Can you have that in your mind? Show of hands. How many of you have somebody in your mind? Like 12 of you. The rest of your hands don't work. Right? You have someone in your mind. You know who the enemies are. Jesus says, love those people. How many of you immediately go down the road of but you don't know what they've done? But you don't know how they treated me. You don't know they're wrong, they're bad, they're evil. They vote independent, they're wrong. We go down that road, don't we? And all of a sudden, the clear teachings of Jesus, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. Ugh. Tastes like shredded wheat. We don't like it. And what do? We decide, well, the Bible was a long time ago. It was written a long time. Society has changed since then, and how much can we actually know about? It's been changed to manage power, and we say things that sound equally as ridiculous as the guard saying, I'm going to tell everybody that the body was stolen while I was asleep. They all sound equally ridiculous, right? Or whenever we run into something else, right? Like Jesus has something to say about what we do with our money. And we go, well, that's a little bit too close. Jesus was actually talking about some Roman coin, and so it's different. We in our society, he doesn't mean my retirement account. He means something else. Don't we? Or is it just me? I am the best justifier of my own desires and behaviors out of all of you. I'm better than all of you at this. I never see me coming. I can trick myself with the best of them. Can't you? Can't you trick yourself into believing that your motivations are pure? Yes, I drove right past that person who needed help, but I'm busy. Don't you do that? We all do that. Every last one of us doesn't like it when Jesus makes a truth claim about our lives. I don't like it. Which is why I surround myself with people who know my propensity to lie to myself. I pay some of them to tell me I'm lying to myself. Because I will always do the same thing the guards do. I will suppress the claim that the resurrection of Jesus makes on my life. Won't you? Don't you do that? When you look at your calendar and you recognize, Jesus never shows up in my calendar. It's like, well, but if Jesus was as important as I am, we all do that. Every last one of us justifies it. And do we justify it like, well, this whole thing about Jesus raising to new, it's just metaphorical, which sounds ridiculous given the amount of evidence that there is to say that it's not. Or we'll say, well, that's just a story. It got bigger over time. The disciples desperately wanted Jesus to be alive. And so they sort of said, we thought we saw him and we were hallucinating. We were all, tripping on something. And we just started to hallucinate. And then the story over the centuries just got bigger. And, the Christians all of a sudden had power. And so now they were like, well, we'll keep out the things that tell us the real story. This is like the ridiculous things that we tell ourselves. And if you do any serious study, you find out that all of those things are as ridiculous as saying, tell everyone that the disciples stole the body while you were asleep. All of our justifications are equally as ridiculous. What's true is that we all say and defend what we want. I do that. You do that. We're expert justifiers. And so when we encounter the risen Jesus, we're perfectly fine for it to be a fable that doesn't hit our real lives. But as soon as you run into a Jesus who is alive, who has something to say about your life, we start to justify. We start to put it down. We start to pretend like it's not real. Yeah, Jesus says certain things about my life, but I like those things. Don't we do that? That's the first encounter that we see here. Jesus' resurrection places a claim on the chief priests and the guards and that they are no longer in charge. And so faced with that reality, they suppress the truth. I mean, most of us, if we are doubters, or if we struggle to believe in the resurrection, if you were in the position of the guards, having seen it firsthand, you'd believe it, probably. The second encounter is by the women. Look at verse 5. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." Verse 8, so the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell the disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." Interestingly enough, I have alluded to this a little bit on Friday night. For those of you who are here, you'll remember. In Isaiah, there's this forecast that the Messiah will die and raise again. 2 chapters before where we are here in chapter 28, Jesus says to the disciples, he says, "I'm going to be crucified, but then I'm going to be raised to life again. Meet me in Galilee. Meet me at the club in Galilee." Here, Jesus is raised, and they still are reminding, like, just so you know, this was forecast. I already told you this was going to happen. Go to Galilee. And he tells the women, go tell the guys to meet me in Galilee. We could call the response that they give, instead of a response of suppression, instead of a response of maintaining control, the other response is this one of surrender. Look at verse 9. Suddenly, Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshiped him. It's fascinating to me to think about what this says. They clasped his feet. Have you ever tried that? Come here, Evan, I'm going to clasp your feet. You know how weird that is? But it's in there to put a posture, to show you what their posture was. It wasn't, "Oh, Jesus, you're so great." They fell on their faces and worshiped Jesus as King, as the Son of God. They worshiped him. This is the posture, the only appropriate posture before the King. Surrender. You can either have your maintained control or you have surrender. There's nothing in the middle. As soon as you encounter the risen Jesus, there's not a sort of like, that's a pretty cool party trick. That's not a thing. There's one of two responses that you can give, and they give the response of surrender. Something that I never tire of pointing out every Easter, because I feel like every Easter is just so blatant. So this is a side point, but I just love it, so I'm going to say it anyway. I think it's beautiful that every one of the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they go out of their way to tell you that the first preachers of the gospel are women. Have you ever noticed this? Like the church as a whole, especially in recent centuries, has like pushed women as like, you got to stay out, based on a couple of misreadings, I think, of select verses in the Bible. But the gospel writers go out of their way to make the point that the women were the first ones to preach the gospel. It's interesting for two reasons. There's two things. From a credibility standpoint, it's extremely unhelpful. It's extremely unhelpful. I had a metaphor that I'm not going to use because it'll be offensive. I'm trying to be good. See me? My wife always is impressed by my attempts at self-control. Women in the first century, both among the Jews and among the Romans, were not credible witnesses. If you had to prove something and you put a woman in a court to testify, you would get laughed out of court because a woman's testimony had no validity. None at all. And yet, the gospel writers go out of their way. Like, think about how unhelpful this is. You're Matthew, you're like writing it all down. You're like, I just want you to see, what happened. And the women saw it first and then went and told people. Horribly unhelpful. And all the gospel writers write it. And here's why I think it's fascinating, because as soon as you get to 1 Corinthians 15, and Paul is writing a letter to Corinth, guess who disappears out of the resurrection appearances? It's the women. Go back and read 1 Corinthians 15. Paul leaves the women out of post-resurrection appearances. Why? Because it's horribly unhelpful. It doesn't help bolster our credibility in the Roman Empire to have women be the first ones. And yet the gospel writers go out of their way to make sure that the women are represented. Why do they do that? Because that's how it happened. Second thing that I find fascinating about it is, fundamentally, having women be the first preachers of the gospel doesn't add anything to the message. Like, it adds nothing. They could have left that out of the Gospels, and you still would have enough evidence to make a case that Jesus had been raised from the dead. You leave it out. It's not helpful. Not only is it not helpful, it doesn't add anything to the message. It's not like, and the women saw. It so much doesn't add anything that when Paul leaves it out in 1 Corinthians, I rotate these passages. Okay, here's an insight. I rotate these passages every Easter. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, 1 Corinthians. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Same story again and again. I have preached the same message out of 1 Corinthians that leaves the women out. It doesn't change the understanding of the resurrection. And yet they leave the women in there. In fact, they go out of their way to leave the women in there. Why do they do that? If it doesn't add anything to the message, the only reason to put that in the narrative is because that's how it happened, and you're trying to say something theologically. The gospel writers were trying to say that now that Jesus has come, now that the kingdom has come, we don't operate the way we used to operate. There's not this male-female dynamic. There's not this women are less than, they're less than full people, and men are the ones, we don't put just men in front and you get to preach because you were born with the right genitalia. That's not how we do it. They're trying to say something, that in the kingdom, women and men are equal. I don't feel like I should have to preach that to the church, but it seems like we have to. Women and men are equal in the kingdom. The foundation of every preaching of the gospel comes out of the resurrection. And who do the gospel writers put it in the mouths of? Put it in the mouths of women. Because they're saying something's different. Something has changed, fundamentally changed, about how the way the world works. Everything about the way this thing that we call the church, this entity, this body, this organization that we all are part of, every foundation is built on the preaching of the gospel. Who preaches the gospel first? The women. Why is that significant? Because before that, it was only the men. And Jesus says, no, in my kingdom, they're equal. As the church, we are people who raise up women because we see Jesus do that. And in the kingdom, that's how that works. There's not this, we think they're equal. As long as women will not stand on the stage, they can talk. And, they can be pastors, but they have to be like women's pastors and youth pastors. Or, we think they can be pastors, just not the lead pastor. But, we think they can even be the lead pastor, just not elders. It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. In the kingdom, women and men can do anything. And it's not distributed based on gender. And where do I get that? The foundation is right out of the Gospels. And if you'd like, I can have a much longer conversation. I'm passionate about it. Can you tell? I almost fell in the water like twice. Get baptized again. I'd love to have a longer conversation if you're like, but what about 1 Timothy? Glad to go there. What about 1 Corinthians? Glad to go there. Let's talk about it. In the kingdom, women and men are equal. They can do anything each other can do. There's no role in the Church of Jesus Christ that is not equally open to men and women. But let's not miss the bigger point. Before we talk about preaching and before we talk about leadership, the first step is what the women demonstrated to us beautifully, is surrender. The first step is always surrender. When you encounter the risen Jesus, you are faced with a decision. Whether you would say, I've been a Christian a long time, or you would say, I'm not a Christian, or you would say, I've been a Christian a very short time. I just got baptized. Now we're dry. We're dry now? All the way dry? Get the hair dry? Yeah, it's good. It's fantastic. No matter how long you've been a follower of Jesus, when we have an encounter with the risen Jesus, we're always forced to a decision. And the decision is, will I hold on to the status quo? Will I hold on to my own control? Will I hold on to my desire to be in charge? Or will I surrender? That's always the choice. That's always the thing we're presented with. Every time Jesus comes face to face with me again about things in my life, the question I get to ask myself is, will I surrender or will I hold on to control? Every time I'm trying to be a people pleaser, every time I'm trying to win your approval and trying to do all of these things, I want to be the one who knows and trying to demonstrate how important I am. Every time I get to that place and Jesus comes, the question that I always have to answer is, will I surrender or will I maintain control? And that's the question that you all have to answer today. Jesus is alive. Will you receive him and surrender, or won't you? That's the choice that you have today. Will you receive him, or won't you? Let me give you a couple of reasons why I think you should, and then I'll wrap it up with this. Why would you choose to surrender? Maybe for you, for the first time, you just realized that this story of the resurrection of Jesus is not a fable, but it actually happened. That the Holy Spirit has illumined your heart and your mind, and today, where you sit today, you understand for the first time Jesus has been raised to new life. It wasn't a metaphor, it's always been real. And the resurrection of Jesus has been presented to you clearly. That would be a reason, just for intellectual integrity. If you recognize that, that would be a reason to surrender. Maybe for you, the second thing, maybe for you, you would choose to surrender because you've realized, like a lot of the rest of us, that no matter how much you think you have control, it's an illusion. Every time you think you have control, and I'm grasping for control, I'm trying to get a little bit more control, what you discover is the world around you is uncontrollable. And you're like, I've been grasping at control my whole life. And all it does is make me anxious and stirred up. Every day I turn on the news. Stop doing that, by the way. It's not helpful. There's still only 30 minutes of news, not 24 hours. That's just my opinion. Also, don't get your news off Facebook. That'll just crush your soul. You look at the news and you go, there's so much more than I can control. I cannot be in control. And I don't trust people enough to let them be in control of my life, right? I look at my retirement account. Have you looked at your retirement account lately? I have less than I started with. And my heart would be stirred up about that, except for I've never been in control. That tells you how old I am. I'm starting to talk about my retirement account. I'm realizing my illustrations need to be updated. But you look at the news, you look at the world around you, if you have been grasping for control of your life, you're probably today more anxious than you've ever been. Because control is an illusion. You're never actually going to have control. And so maybe you would surrender because you've recognized that control is an illusion. Maybe the third reason. Maybe you would choose to surrender because you've realized that Jesus can be trusted. I don't know about you. People let me down all the time. All the time. People like that for you? They let you down all the time, tell you they're going to be here at this time and then they're not here. Or they had it on the wrong day, or they had this happen and that happened. You know, the fact that Facebook gave us the maybe button for I'm going to come. Maybe. Right? It's hard to trust people anyway, right? You have people right now who have told you they're maybe coming to your Easter lunch, right? And you're like, well, I have to make food. Can you tell me more than maybe? Can you imagine what it's like for someone to make a promise that they can keep through death? I mean, most of us don't have friends like that. Most of us don't have friends who make a promise and say, I'm going to die and come out the other side and I will keep my promise. You wonder if people are going to come to your party. Jesus has made a promise before he died that he keeps on the back end. And so maybe for the first time you've realized that if Jesus can be trusted through death, then maybe every word he ever spoke was true. And so maybe you would surrender because you've realized Jesus could be trusted. Maybe the last reason you would surrender today is because you've tried everything else and you're at the end of your rope. I've tried everything else to make my life right. And yet I sit here in this church building on a Sunday morning for Easter, and I recognize I'm out of answers. I'm out of options. I don't have anything else. Do you know at the end of your rope is where Jesus just begins? When you get to the end of your rope, you finally get into the place where Jesus begins to do things for you. Because all along, you've never been able to do it. He's always wanted to do it. There's lots of reasons that you might surrender, but every time you're presented with the risen Jesus, the choice is, will I hold on to my own control or will I surrender? Why would you not?